I wasn't looking for a lost civilization. But then I found the photographs, some of the images you see from the era that show these buildings. They appeared in estate collections tucked between portraits and landscapes. Nothing marked them as significant, but something about them refused to settle. The scale was wrong, the ornamentation too refined, and the sheer number of them scattered across continents suggested a pattern I couldn't explain. They were theatres, opera houses, performance halls of staggering architectural ambition, and according to the official timeline, they shouldn't exist. It began with a single image, certain photographs from the period depicting grand interiors, gilded boxes, frescoed ceilings, chandelier systems that would require engineering expertise we're told didn't exist in frontier towns. The caption identified it as a municipal theatre in a settlement barely 20 years old. 20 years from wilderness to this? I started collecting similar photographs: San Francisco, Manaus, Melbourne, Irkutsk, Montevideo. Each city told the same story. Rapid settlement followed almost immediately by the construction of world-class performance venues, not simple halls, not modest civic buildings, but structures rivaling the great European opera houses in complexity, scale, and artistic achievement. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Let's examine what we're told about San Francisco. The city's founding is typically dated to the gold rush of 1849. A tent city, prospectors and merchants, muddy streets and wooden shacks. By 1856, 7 years later, the city had completed a theatre that seated over 1,500 people. The interior featured hand-carved balconies, imported crystal fixtures, and acoustic engineering sophisticated enough to support full orchestral performances. Some of these images from that period show details that professional architects today struggle to replicate. 7 years, I started checking other cities. The chronology repeated with disturbing exactness. Melbourne, settled 1835, Grand Theatre by 1854. Manaus, rubber boom town founded mid-century, opera house completed with materials shipped from Europe, installed by workers who supposedly learned complex assembly techniques on site. Montevideo, established as a military outpost, producing architectural marvels within a generation. The question becomes unavoidable. Where did the expertise come from? Not the raw materials, though shipping marble, crystal, and structural steel to remote locations poses its own logistical mysteries. But the knowledge, the architectural training, the engineering calculations required for those ceiling spans, the acoustic science behind those perfectly curved walls. You don't develop that expertise in frontier conditions. You inherit it. Some of these images reveal details that should vary wildly across continents, but they don't. The same ceiling treatment appears in theatres separated by 8,000 miles. The same column capitals, the same decorative motifs, the same proportional relationships between stage depth and auditorium width, as if the designers were working from a common template. This presents a coordination problem. We're expected to believe that architects in South America, Australia, Siberia, and North America independently developed nearly identical solutions to theatrical design, that they arrived at the same ornamental vocabulary without communication, that they mastered the same structural engineering challenges without shared knowledge. The official explanation is convergent evolution, similar problems producing similar solutions. But convergent evolution doesn't explain identical decorative details. It doesn't explain the repetition of specific acoustic innovations. And it certainly doesn't explain why these buildings appeared simultaneously across the globe during the same narrow window of history. The evidence points to something far more expansive. Certain photographs from the period depicting construction sites reveal their own anomalies, not the buildings themselves, but who built them. The workers in these images don't match the demographic profile we'd expect. We're told these theatres rose in boomtowns populated by prospectors, migrants and merchants, people chasing economic opportunity, not trained in old-world craftsmanship. Yet the work required specialised knowledge, plasterwork that's still intact after 170 years, stonework fitted without visible mortar, fresco techniques requiring years of apprenticeship, chandelier installations demanding precise counterweight calculations. Where did these workers come from? The documentation is sparse. Employment records from this period rarely survived. The few that did show unusual patterns, sudden influxes of European craftsmen appearing for specific projects, then vanishing from the historical record. No immigration documents, no subsequent employment, no family lineages traced. They arrived, they built, they disappeared. And this is the most peculiar part, the speed. I obtained building permits and municipal records from several cities. When these documents exist, and often they don't, they reveal timelines that border on impossible. A theatre in Sacramento, foundation to completion in 11 months. The building contained 42 decorative ceiling panels, each requiring weeks of specialized painting. Marble columns shipped from Italy, installed with precision that modern contractors struggled to match. A stage system of mechanical complexity that suggests engineering knowledge beyond what boomtown builders should possess. 11 months? Not the reason, not the timing, not the conditions. How? The pattern resurfaces with disturbing exactness. Melbourne's theatre, 14 months. A hall in Buenos Aires, 9 months from groundbreaking to opening night. These aren't reasonable timelines, even with modern construction methods and power tools. With hand tools and horse-drawn transport, the sanctioned explanation falls apart at this point. We're told that determination and available capital can accomplish anything. That American entrepreneurial spirit overcame logistical limitations, that skilled workers simply achieved remarkable efficiency. But efficiency has limits, physics has constraints, and the photographic evidence shows results that shouldn't exist within those constraints. Some of these images from different continents, different decades, reveal components that appear mass-produced. Not roughly similar, identical. Certain balcony railings, specific chandelier designs, decorative plasterwork that matches down to the smallest flourish, as if produced from the same moulds, installed by workers following the same instructions. This prompts a straightforward yet vital question. Where were these components manufactured? The industrial infrastructure required to produce such elements at scale, the foundries, the workshops, the quality control systems, should leave traces. Factory records, shipping manifests, patent applications for the specialized techniques involved. These records don't exist. Instead, we find silence. Gaps in the archival record precisely where documentation should be most robust. Municipal files with missing pages, shipping ledgers with entries removed, building department records that were lost to fire or damaged by water at remarkably convenient moments. The absence of documentation is itself documentation. It reveals what someone didn't want preserved. One of many forgotten photographs shows interior details that professional acousticians find remarkable. The curve of the walls, the angle of the ceiling panels, the placement of sound-dampening surfaces and reflective materials. These aren't decorative choices. They're sophisticated acoustic engineering solutions that require mathematical modeling, empirical testing, and deep understanding of sound propagation. We're told that frontier architects simply possessed intuitive genius. That trial and error produced these results, that each city independently discovered optimal theatrical acoustic design. But the science of architectural acoustics wasn't formalized until the early 20th century. Wallace Sabine's groundbreaking work at Harvard didn't occur until the 1890s. Yet theatres built decades earlier demonstrate principles that Sabine would later codify as revolutionary discoveries. How did builders in the 1850s and 1860s know what scientists hadn't yet proven? The further I went into acoustic studies of these surviving structures, the more troubling the picture became. Modern acoustic consultants measuring these spaces find reverberation times optimized for the human voice. Reflective surfaces positioned with mathematical precision. Ceiling heights calculated to eliminate specific resonance problems. This level of knowledge doesn't emerge from guesswork. It represents inherited expertise, refined over generations. But whose expertise, and where did those generations of refinement occur? Around the turn of the 20th century, something changed. Theatres built after 1900 lack the characteristics of their predecessors. The ornamentation simplifies, the engineering becomes more conventional, the acoustic sophistication diminishes, as if the knowledge that produced the earlier structures had evaporated. Some of these images from that transitional period show hybrid buildings, attempts to replicate earlier grandeur that fall demonstrably short. The details are coarser, the proportions slightly wrong, the acoustic results measurably inferior. Not a gradual evolution, a rupture. What happened? The official narrative offers industrial progress, changing tastes, economic shifts, but those explanations don't account for the loss of capability. Societies advance, they build on previous knowledge. They don't suddenly forget how to achieve what they'd mastered a generation before, unless the knowledge was never theirs to begin with. I reached out to architectural historians, municipal archivists, preservation societies. I asked simple questions. Where did the expertise come from? How were these timelines achieved? Who designed these remarkably consistent structures? The silence was overwhelming. Not hostility, not defensiveness, just disinterest, as if the questions themselves were irrelevant. The buildings exist, therefore they were built. The timeline is documented, therefore it's accurate. The official record is complete, therefore no investigation is needed. But the official record isn't complete. It's riddled with gaps, inconsistencies, and convenient omissions. And the few historians willing to engage eventually retreat behind the same refrain. Insufficient evidence for alternative explanations. Insufficient evidence? The buildings themselves are evidence. The photographs are evidence. The impossible timelines, the unexplained expertise, the global coordination, all evidence. The question isn't whether evidence exists, it's whether we're permitted to examine it honestly. An image that wasn't meant to stand out shows workers during a theatre renovation in the 1920s. They've removed decorative panels to access structural elements beneath. What they found changed the restoration plan. Behind the visible architecture lay older construction, different materials, different techniques. The decorative elements weren't original features, they were additions covering something that preceded them, something the renovators couldn't explain. This pattern appears in multiple theatres where deep renovations occurred. Workers find layers beneath layers, construction methods that shouldn't exist in the documented timeline, materials that weren't available in the recorded construction period. The findings are typically sealed away. The renovations proceed according to plan, and the discoveries vanish into private collections or municipal basements where they never see scholarly examination. What were these buildings before they became theatres? And why does their earlier form remain so carefully hidden? Let me be precise about what we're examining here. Between approximately 1850 and 1890, cities across 6 continents constructed elaborate theatrical venues using remarkably consistent architectural principles, advanced engineering techniques, and standardized decorative elements. This occurred during a period of limited communication, slow transportation, and supposedly independent development. The buildings appeared in frontier settlements, colonial outposts, and rapidly growing urban centres, locations lacking the educational infrastructure, skilled workforce, and industrial capacity such projects should require. The construction timelines defy reasonable explanation. The architectural sophistication exceeds documented expertise. The global consistency suggests coordination that shouldn't be possible. And precisely where documentation should illuminate these mysteries, we find erasure. Not the gradual loss that time inflicts on all records, deliberate systematic removal of evidence, files missing specific pages, photographs removed from collections, building permits with crucial details redacted or destroyed. Someone didn't want this examined too closely. The conventional explanation requires us to believe in remarkable coincidences, that dozens of cities independently decided to prioritize elaborate theatres in their earliest development stages despite lacking basic infrastructure. That skilled craftsman appeared exactly when needed, then vanished without trace. That architectural knowledge emerged fully formed in locations lacking the institutional framework to develop such expertise. That construction techniques exceeding modern capabilities were somehow routine for frontier builders. That acoustic engineering principles unknown to science were nevertheless perfectly implemented. That identical decorative elements appeared on opposite sides of the planet without coordination. That this explosion of theatrical construction suddenly ceased, leaving later generations unable to replicate their predecessors' achievements, and that the documentation of all this conveniently disappeared, was destroyed, or never existed in the first place. How many coincidences before we're obligated to consider alternative explanations? A frame preserved without explanation shows a theatre interior on opening night. The audience is dressed formally. The building gleams. Everything appears as the historical record describes. But look closer. The chandeliers aren't new. They show patina, wear patterns suggesting decades of use. The decorative plasterwork has been repaired. You can see the slightly different texture where sections were restored. The marble columns bear marks consistent with weathering, not fresh installation. The building wasn't new, it was reclaimed. This detail appears in multiple photographs from different cities, different years. Buildings presented as recent construction bearing the marks of previous use. Wear patterns that don't match the official timeline. Restoration work masquerading as original construction. What were they restoring? And why present it as new construction rather than acknowledging what preceded it? I didn't start this investigation believing in lost civilizations or hidden history. I found photographs that didn't align with accepted explanations and followed the inconsistencies wherever they led. They led here to a pattern of magnificent theatres appearing globally within a narrow historical window, constructed with expertise that shouldn't exist, coordinated in ways we can't explain, and documented in records systematically purged of meaningful detail. These weren't simple civic buildings. They were repositories of knowledge, performance halls requiring sophisticated understanding of acoustics, engineering, material science, and architectural design. They appeared in places that couldn't produce such knowledge independently, and then the capability vanished as if the source of that expertise had been cut off. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss, the evidence too substantial to ignore, the silence too deliberate to be coincidental. What knowledge did these theatres represent? Who possessed the expertise to design and build them? What came before the official founding dates of these cities? And what happened to erase both the builders and the building techniques from historical memory? The photographs remain. The buildings still stand, those that haven't been demolished or renovated beyond recognition. The evidence persists despite generations of careful neglect. But the answers? Those are sealed behind archival doors we're told don't need opening, hidden in documents we're assured don't exist, buried beneath explanations that collapse under scrutiny but remain unchallenged by institutional scholarship. I wasn't looking for proof of Tartaria. I was looking for an explanation that fits the evidence. And the further I dug, the clearer it became. Whatever built these theatres, it wasn't the frontier towns we see in our history books. It was something larger, something older, something that was here before our accepted chronology begins. And someone made very sure we'd never know what it was. The theatres stand as monuments to that erasure, beautiful, impossible, and utterly unexplained. What else did we inherit without knowing its origin? And what else was taken from us before we even knew it existed?